Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is Romola D Reports. This is Romola D, and I'm here today with Neelu Chaudhari and with Lee Cant from the UK. And we are going to be talking about the Edward Ellis case and what's been happening with Mr. Edward Ellis and why it's so important for us to speak about his case and what's happening there because of what he represents and the great work that he's been doing for many, many corruption victims in the UK. So first of all, welcome Neelu, welcome Lee. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Romola, for hosting us at short notice with Edward's plight. So I've been on this for 20
Go right
years.
ahead. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Neelu. We need to hear a little bit about your background and about your background with the entire mass corruption remedy process as well. That would be very helpful.
yeah. So my nightmare started in 2000 with my baby niece. I was dying of cancer. I was on chemotherapy. I was like a 70-year-old woman with my hair had fallen out. And I witnessed my baby niece's neglect, as in denial of oxygen. I didn't know at the time she was being overdosed. All I knew was the oxygen was being denied. She went purple. Her blood oxygen was 37.5%. Normally it's 98%. And my sister called the doctor out. He refused. They dismantled the oxygen machine. Baby died. We then found semen on her bib and in her mouth. My sister told me that we found out that that's what had happened to the baby. She'd been gang raped in the hospital, and we collected 12,000 signatures for a new investigation into the death. The coroner covered it up, Dr. Elizabeth Stern, and the police covered it up. And the police, she was isolated under a family court emergency protection order with an arrest warrant and against me if I was to try to intervene with her care or whatever, gang rape. I would be arrested.
We should mention you're a pharmacist, Neelu, and you spoke out about some of the chemicals, some of the drugs involved, right?
I didn't know that at the time, but after she died, I went through the medical file. I did expert reports, and I proved 60 doctors, nurses, and pharmacists were guilty of her manslaughter, of her murder, because ranitidine was not licensed for use in children under 2 years of age. She was given an adult dose. The dose for her weight was supposed to be 3 milligrams 3 times a day. She was given 150 milligrams twice a day, which is why her heart packed up and she went purple. And then she was injected in the neck here with potassium chloride, which is the last lethal injection in death row. In the post-mortem photographs, you can see the needle in the neck, and Dr. Thomas Rager was with her, and Chris McMenamin, the nurse, was with her. Kathy Allingford was the ward manager at Clover Ward at King George Hospital, Barking, Havering and Redbridge Trust. And the police, Ilford Police, Metropolitan Police were involved in the criminal cover-up. Then the body disappeared in 2007. Up till 2007, I was working as a locum in Birmingham on 2007, and I was filling up my petrol, and as I looked over, I saw the name of the funeral directors that had stolen her body. And luckily for me, it said, call this number, it's a Sunday, and the guy said, wait here, I'm coming. So he got the body, and we got the body to India within a couple of weeks. This was when the London Borough of Redbridge threatened that they were going to dispose of the body under the Diseases Act. So then we went to the High Court in Delhi to ask for a new investigation. They referred it to the 18th Law Commission of India, which did the report 206, which said all suspicious deaths of Indians will be investigated in India, abroad, if they died abroad. So I've got now 5 murders of my 5 members of my family that have been murdered in England. So I've had many attempts on my life, in many attempts. So has Lee, and because we campaign to stop the children being abused in England, and that really gets you murdered. If you try to stop, and you get mental health fraud, you get kidnapped. And Edward has been the campaigning with the baby murder case as the top case in the UK. He was sent by the Royal Commission to look for me because of the quality of the documents submitted by Dr. Rukina Odoko, who was the president of the Law Society, Uganda Law Society, and my dad, who was a judge in Jalandhar in India. They were both the same age, so they couldn't understand how much treason they witnessed in the courts with the coroner, the police, they wouldn't allow Dr. Odoko to come to the inquest. They wouldn't let me come at the inquest. And we appealed that decision of the coroner, and she just went ahead, and it was actually September 11th, the Twin Towers coming down, that stopped us being in the front page news as nuisance family that won't have what we're told, won't accept what we're told. So even professionals are murdered in England, especially whistleblower pharmacists, they want to continue this poverty and slavery system. So my sister was also murdered.
This has been happening for a very long time, is what you're saying. This has been the situation, as many of us unfortunately are familiar with, and there's been a sort of laissez-faire attitude toward whistleblowers being retaliated against, activists being retaliated against, activists being murdered. This is wrong, and this is part of what we are attempting to correct by speaking out very strongly on this subject. Please continue the story, Neelu. I just wanted to point out that this is wrong. Whistleblowers should not be retaliated against. People standing up against crime and corruption should not be retaliated against.
Especially that I was backed by two honourable judges who are now murdered. Both of them are murdered. And I can tell you how they were both murdered in the NHS, by the NHS.
And your sister also?
My sister was murdered as well, and my mother and the baby. So I've come to the conclusion that everyone who comes to England is going to end up with because people die in ambulances, they die in hospitals. Very few people actually die at home. And then there are lots of staged events like kidnaps that people disappear. They end up in mental health secure units. We've had so many kidnaps in the Royal Courts of Justice. This Edward's kidnap is just one of the attempts on his life. I mean, he was manhandled out of Court 37. I don't know if you were there, Lee. He was literally lifted off his chair and carried out. And then you were also there that day when the security did not let him come into his own committal. I think it was like February 2019. And I went into the courtroom. You and some others, Belinda was there. You'd been told to get out of the public gallery area. And you were outside, and I came and I said, the security, Edward was with me, and Edward was stopped by security. And I grabbed my bag and I went in front of Edward, and they said to me, "Do you know him?" I said, "No, I don't know him." Because I knew they'd stopped him and they were going to stop me. So I had to say, and Edward said, "Oh, Neelu." So anyway, I went into the courtroom and I saw Lee and Belinda outside. I said, "Wait, what's happened?" I went in. I said, "Is this the hearing for Edward Ellis?" And the judge has got his head down. Judge, what was his name, Lee? I can't remember. Turner? Was it Turner?
It was Turner, yeah.
And then I said it again. I said, "Is this the hearing for Edward Ellis?" I still had us down there, right? And then I said, third time, "Is this the hearing for Edward Ellis?" And he just went to Mr. Eardley sideways. "I think we'd better let him in. I think we'd better let him in."
So they were trying to hold him back at his own hearing.
Going to arrest him for not turning up.
Yeah, boy. So there's huge stories here. I mean, there's just so much to unravel. I know with each of your cases, we've talked a little bit about your case, Neelu, before. Before we move on to talk further about Edward, Lee, did you wish to introduce yourself a little bit and give us a little bit about your background as well?
That's a very big question to answer,
Shall
and
I summarize? Shall I summarize, Lee?
I think we should spend our time focusing on Edward because
Let me
his
summarize. Lee
his
is an
case is so
accountant.
big,
Lee is an
and
accountant who's been fighting corruption in Hackney Council against the Hackney Council. They've been charging him service charges without providing any services. He's been, suffering from mold. They're meant to renovate the mold and they're meant to keep him safe. He's fallen down many times in potholes and been run over by vehicles on pavements. And he
noise, loud banging, even at 3 a.m. in the morning.
noisy neighbors,
Other,
manufacturing plants with neighbors, and he has been kidnapped. You've been kidnapped many times. People banging
by
out your doors.
PC Martin. This is a document prepared by Edward, and you can see PC Martin, who it was an early morning raid by 3 policemen who threatened to smash my door down early in the morning.
I think basically your case is part of the mass remedy process and the Coronation Oath Enforcement Authority case against the councils. But because we've had the bank case against the Lloyds Banking Group by Anthony Stansfeld and the FCA fine of 80 million dropped to 45 million, that we can dissolve all councils for fraudulent trading, their money laundering. That your case proves that all the councils are money laundering the council tax and the service charges, and so we can cease their trading and seize their assets and get the compensation that you deserve for all the pain and suffering and all the noise and stress and trauma. I mean, these people think that we're just going to drop dead, all of us, if they just carry on with their tortures of us, state terrorism against us.
Yeah.
But, so Edward's basically got kidnapped this time because of the case of Shamsud. And the Shamsud case is that his banker's son worked at Lloyds Banking Group, and that the father was made homeless in November or December, and the court decided against the son actually, but they still came and took the house. So the 3 properties owned by the dad have been stolen by the banker's son, the systems analyst for Lloyds. And so that again, after the jail sentences of the Lloyds Banking Group in 2017, makes it a contempt of the Criminal Appeals Court, because the Criminal Appeals Court had that case in 2020, 28th of February 2020. And so the Lloyds Banking Group is continuing. They stole my late sister's house on the 19th of October 2022, 6 weeks before Shams, and on the 17th of March 2023. So they're in contempt of this terrorism international, the Crime International Cooperation Act, which is a terrorism law. The bank is in contempt, and because Lloyds Banking Group is a central bank, that means that the government, because the government owns the central bank, that the government is also fit for dissolving. That's where the point at where we're at, aren't we, Lee? We've proved the councils are trading illegally, fraudulently, causing terrorism to the people that they're meant to serve. The banks are doing it, 200 billion every year laundered abroad. And the prisons are full of political prisoners like Edward Ellis. We have in England a terrorist state. Yeah, go ahead, Lee.
Just Edward hasn't really committed any crime. He hasn't done anything wrong. There's nothing. All he is doing is objecting against the artificial, fake restraint orders imposed on him by the High Court. The judges and Judge Kerr wrote out the verdict on the 8th of March this year, which was full of false statements. The whole verdict is complete nonsense. There's no evidence against Edward. There's no supporting documentation that Edward has done anything wrong. It's purely accusations. What that verdict states clearly is that people like Sham Sud, was recruited by Edward as a campaign, as a movement, almost like a cult, that Edward was manipulating, using to further his causes, which is complete nonsense. Sham Sud has come out and made public statements that he was never ever recruited by Edward.
Yes,
Never
and
ever.
I think, yes, and I looked at some of that, the judgment, all of these false claims and false accusations, which are essentially seeking to completely invalidate the entire mass corruption remedy process that Edward's been engaged in, right? By simply denying that there are so many corruption victims, that these cases are all false, and kind of miscasting is probably the correct word, miscasting the entire endeavor to bring these cases forward before the public eye. And before the monarchy, the Equity Monarchy Trust, of course, that, is behind what this whole equity law thing is about, equity governance is all about, trying to invalidate the whole process and deny that these cases actually exist, that these people actually exist, and that they've actually suffered wrongdoing, they've suffered injustice, that the whole thing is actually authentic. And that's kind of incredible that they would write that and publish it, and much needs to be made of that. That's the kind of thing that needs to be reported publicly, in print journalism in particular, in the UK.
Can I take your point a bit further, Lee? It's not just that, they falsified a case against Edward. It's that the civil courts have hijacked the criminal courts, because you can't go to jail from the Royal Courts of Justice. If you plead not guilty, you're entitled to a jury trial. And there are no jury trials in the civil courts. If you're being accused of contempt of court because you've breached a restraining order, but there's a big but in that. Edward was a registered solicitor with the Law Society. The Law Society told Edward he could stay on the roll if he promised not to do anti-corruption cases. Edward said he was not willing to stop doing anti-corruption cases. And that's why he was removed, which proves that all solicitors that are on the roll are criminals, or that they would be willing to commit crimes to stay on the register. This is how horrific the regulatory bodies have become now. And the same parallels with the Pharmaceutical Society of Great Britain, now called the General Pharmaceutical Council. They struck me off rather than the 60 assassins that routinely murdered babies. So they only have assassins, pharmacists on their rolls who are willing to kill babies on order, or remain silent if they've witnessed the crimes of gang rape of a baby in the hospital. And the same with the financial regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority. They have got their money, the £45 million fine, from the bank, Lloyds Banking Group, but the victim families, 900 of them with 5 to 15 victims in each case, as Trevor Mealham says, they are still without their compensation from 2017, whereas the bank has paid the FCA the fine. How can the FCA collect its fine without ensuring that the victims have got their compensation? And how could the bank have stolen my late sister's house and made Shamsud homeless last year, end of last year, when the banks were sent to jail for exactly that? Fraudulent trading, money laundering, and human trafficking.
That's right. This
Now,
runs parallel just quickly with the Martin Sexton case, where he got a crime reference number against the cabinet, for COVID deaths and murders, and there's a whole long history behind that case. And he had two lawyers, a barrister working with him to help put the bundles together. And now the Solicitors Society and the SRA, the regulation authority, are now doing the same to those who are helping Martin Sexton. They're about to strike them off and punish them for helping bring charges against the government and government corruption. So
Instead of investigating the actual story, right?
in-
Instead of
the police
investigating the actual
refused to
scenario.
investigate. Yeah, they
Yeah,
refused
I
to investigate.
followed that a little bit, and certainly republished, I guess, Martin's video that was on Telegram quite a bit. It was going around.
it's Mark.
Boy, this was
I think it's
Mark,
Mark.
right? Mark Sexton. Yeah, Mark Sexton, a couple years ago. So, it's shocking to me as well to find that physicians who've actually spoken out, people from the inside who've spoken out about the vaccines, they are the ones who are continuing to be held under scrutiny when in fact it's the vaccines themselves that should be properly looked at again. And I see all of that is coming back in the news now. This is the kind of thing that I was covering along with many others, with doctors, with natural health physicians, with other journalists a year ago, 2 years ago. And it's astonishing that it's taken so much time yet, and people in the government, both in the UK and the US, still haven't quite gotten the actual truth of what's happened over here. Because the whole thing needs to have been pulled down a long time ago, and hopefully it is. I think it's slowly coming into the news now. And what Mark Sexton did was absolutely incredible, amazing. He stood up on his own, and he got lawyers around him, he got physicians to help. The kind of work that he did is kind of like the work that you guys have been doing, and along with Edward, on all of these corruption cases, which are literally crime and perjury and injustice cases, right? And showing the perjury being committed by solicitors, by regulatory authorities, by judges, and people, in fact, were making pots of money doing it, right? Thousands of dollars, pounds, you're in England, British pounds and euros in Europe as well. So let's talk about Edward. Edward was wrongfully, once again, falsely arrested from civil court, right? Tell us a little bit about the court system, because here in the US, we have a slightly different court system, I think. So what is the difference between the high court, the civil court, the royal courts? Where was he arrested? And why was he taken to Pentonville prison? What is the significance of this particular prison? Neelu, you've done some research over there. You've found out something about the history of the prison. Is this like a maximum security prison? Why has Edward been left there for a whole year? Why has he been sentenced for a whole year? What kind of impact does this have on his health, his age, and the fact that indeed he has needed kidney dialysis, and you and several others stood up and spoke for him and tried to get him that? Is he getting the treatment? How is he doing? What's going on? Are you in touch with him, etc.?
So the judges refused to believe Edward was a patient for kidney dialysis when they got him kidnapped. And we made the arrangements that night by making phone calls. So his dialysis was due the next day and he got it. But over the next few weeks, he said he was missing out on 25% dialysis time because of the 2 police officer requirement. He was waiting around in the van for 4 hours before they both got together in the van. Then it's a 4-hour on the dialysis machine, and then it's a 4-hour return. So 12-hour round trip just for 4 hours of dialysis. And then I looked up the research that they had got dialysis facilities in a prison in North Nottingham, and that it went well. And I asked them if they would do that for him. And they, you know, I did the fill calls, and I did then recently I've done it the second time round, because he's not had any visitors, and we're frustrated by the procedures. The online booking doesn't work for Pentonville, and I suspect it's because it has been deemed as unfit for purpose. It's had 2 Care Quality Commission assessments that it failed, and it hasn't made any improvement since the last one. There were plans to change it to developments, residential housing, and I think that it's been bought out for more money to carry on kidnapping political prisoners through the back door and killing them. I think that's what's happened here, to be honest, because the phone call I made to Sopra Steria, to Pentonville Prison, turned out to be Sopra Steria, a company based in France on Dun and Bradstreet. They have 500 branches all over England and Europe and in India. So it's a data collection center, which means it's able to hijack the public services of England. It's pretending to be the Home Office. It's pretending to be the prison service. But it's just a call center, and the woman was so rude to me when I said to her, she asked me if I was calling from an embassy and what relationship I was to Edward. And I said, you are asking me to breach my privacy data. You tell me your surname and I will, I will talk to you. She said, I'm not willing to give you the name, and that's the end of the call. And then subsequently, I had 2 positive calls from the safer custody and the fill. So I think I got the brick wall removed of the Sopra Steria with Edward, and hopefully that they're going to provide him with proper dialysis in the prison without having to waste 12 hours of his time.
When did you make these calls, Neelu? Because were you able to actually make a change over there? Because initially, you've sent us 3 calls, I think, and the first one was pretty spectacular. That's the one you're talking about, right? You spoke to her, and but you persisted. She was really not interested in continuing the conversation. You persisted, and she didn't give you her last name, but she kind of said she'd look into it. Is that what happened?
I think that I didn't want her to do anything, because once I found out she's Sopra Steria, all I know is that she's hijacked the Home Office. She's not a public service. She's impersonating Pentonville Prison. She's impersonating all the prisons in England. She's impersonating the Home Office public service. And therefore, the government is unfit for purpose, because they've allowed these hijackers to provide these call centers to hijack if I'm speaking to her and they've hijacked Edward's privacy data, now I've just called her on my mobile number, and they have now put me on a ransom for the privacy data of my life, my voice.
So let's break this down a little bit. So basically you're saying that now that you've discovered, and I think a lot of people have been discovering, that the prison services in our countries are not being run by the government per se, but are sort of being farmed out to third-party contractors. They're being owned by private corporations. And in this case, in the UK, you're saying that the prison system, that particular prison, Pentonville Prison, plus the general prison system, is owned by a French company. It's situated in France. Is this something huge? I mean, it sounds kind of major. So basically what you're saying is the prison services should be run by the court system, should be run by the government, but it's not. It's being run by a French company. So therefore, there are huge issues of breach of privacy data over here. And also healthcare, right? Healthcare is not being provided then by the government, by His Majesty's prison system in your case, but it's being hijacked. and healthcare is not really being provided to the prisoners because of this private ownership scenario. Perhaps Lee can address that as well, because you are a former CPA, aren't you, Lee, with a background in how private corporations are set up and how they work and stuff.
Yeah, Sopra Steria is a publicly listed company on the stock exchange, and their shares are currently trading at about 182 euros. And can you see clearly?
Oh, you have to
Can
hit
you
share
see?
screen, Lee. We aren't seeing your screen at all.
I see.
You you want to hit
I've
share
clicked,
first.
I have clicked on share, but okay, I'll click briefly for the entire screen. So I'll click on that. So that's Mark Sexton, that
Mhm.
the interview. That's the lawyer of Martin Sexton. So I'm just wondering, okay, I'll get rid of that and replace it. Okay, I clicked to get rid of it. So I'll read to you instead what it says. So the CEO of this is Cyril Malage. There's 48,700 employees. The HQ is in Paris, and it was founded in 1968, and it's an IT company, information technology company. And all this information is found even on Wikipedia. And also there's a page which says our 7 convictions for the future of banking, which is quite odd. It's a very odd page. Um,
Mhm.
can you see that now? Yeah.
Actually, I've started to share my screen. I'm just showing the Sopra Steria. I couldn't see it at all on your screen,
Yeah.
Lee. So if you can see your screen should have, I'm just showing the Sopra Steria page, the front
Okay.
page, the home page. Yeah. So,
Oh, yeah. There it is. Our 7 convictions for the future of banking. And that's about Sopra Steria, which is that's a very strange thing to say. And can you see on the right hand side here, it talks about the share price and the number of employees, 48,700. You can
I'm
read,
not,
can you read that?
It's not
I'm
your
look,
screen Lee, showing, I don't think. I think you've
yeah,
got to close the screen because it's not showing anything.
Not showing. I can see it on my screen that I'm looking at,
It's not
but
showing anything.
okay.
well, I'm looking at it and it
Anyway,
says 50,000 employees,
yeah,
5.1 billion euros of revenue in 2022, top 5 European digital services companies. I mean, it
That's
yeah.
doesn't
not
say anything about prison services, does it? I mean, shouldn't it say what it does?
that's not what I'm seeing. I'm just seeing a screen that's not moving at all.
Oh,
Um,
It
aha,
I
industries, aerospace, defense and security, energy and utilities, financial services, insurance and social, government, retail, telecommunication, media and entertainment, transport. Boy, it's running governments?
can you try share screening your screen, Romola? Because I think Lee's is frozen.
Oh,
Could you
I
try
thought I was sharing
it's
screen.
not showing.
So I would suggest we move on to the next point about Edward, the fact that Neelu has done an incredible job of spending hundreds of hours telephoning and emailing the prisoner, um, the care system, the CQC system, which Edward falls under, and the governor. And likewise, I've done the same. I've sent emails to the governor, but he never replies. He just gets his secretary to send a brief note saying, we are doing our best care for Edward. But anyone can say that. They could be lying and not telling the truth. Anyone can make that statement. There's no evidence. And Edward has written a letter to another supporter. And in that letter, Edward says that there have been problems arriving late at Broomfield Hospital to receive dialysis, exactly what Neelu says. So he's only getting 2.5 hours instead of 4 hours of dialysis because they're arriving late. Then the governor is not allowing Edward to use the library in the prison. He's not being allowed access to print off appeal forms for the High Court and the Supreme Court. So he hasn't been able to appeal against his sentence. He's not receiving any adequate care because of his dialysis condition. And we also lodged appeals on his behalf, but the Supreme Court and the High Court rejected those appeals that we lodged on the grounds that they must be lodged by Edward. And in our documents, we said we are doing it on behalf of Edward, that Edward wanted us to appeal on his behalf, and they completely rejected it. So how can Edward appeal if the governor of the prison is not letting him fill in any appeal forms?
Neelu, do you have a comment on that? Is there something about the court system that we need to know over here? Is it possible for somebody else to appeal on behalf of a prisoner,
Yeah,
to the
we're allowed
court?
to do
I think
You're allowed to do that.
whatever we try to do, their intention is to kill Edward, and that's obvious because the lengths they've gone to deny him. He's only got 4% kidney working since 2019. 3 times a week dialysis, 4 hours each session, for a 70-year-old man does not give him much life unless he has a kidney transplant. He asked for a kidney transplant list, but he was removed by a corrupt doctor who was bought out. So all the judges and doctors are bribed to do these crimes against the whistleblowers. It's a standard operating procedures in England's public services. They're all hijacked by the banks because the banks will finance any amount of money to kill whistleblowers like myself and Edward and Lee. And that's the extent that they've gone to. They've stolen my house, they've stolen my late sister's house whilst it's still going through probate, and Edward is the executor on the will. Edward was dragged out from the Wrongful County Court, and Edward was denied his executorship, and the fact that he was, you cannot touch my late sister's house whilst it's going through probate, and things like that. Is that the procedure is that when Edward appealed inside that hearing, 3rd of May this year, to Lord Justice Coulson and Lord Justice Lewison, that I am appealing your, sentencing of me. And he had an 8-week window given to him on the 3rd of March, and they could not have sent him to prison until he had his appeal, and that was not an appeal. Because his appeal was to the Supreme Court. If he didn't win at that hearing, then he still had a right of appeal to the Supreme Court, which he said, I'm appealing, you cannot send. And the private security basically kidnapped him to the back of the courtroom. And the same security guards, a 50-year-old, 4'10" with short dark hair, and 6', 40-year-old Ross with dark hair. They were there on the 8th of March. They were there. They were just waiting to grab him. They just Like the police, the G4S prison van was parked in the East Block car park the whole day, each time Edward had a hearing. So these are all predetermination signs, is that they want to kill Edward. They will go to any length to kill him. They will have staged this hearing in a civil court. The Royal Courts of Justice is a civil court. It's not a magistrate's court. It's not a Crown Court. So you cannot be sentenced to prison unless you're in a Crown Court. Now, this case against Edward has been brought by the Attorney General. The Attorney General's role is as an advisor to the government. The Attorney General cannot bring a case against a whistleblower, a volunteer who is assisting cases free of charge. You have to remember, it's free of charge. Edward is not profiting from this. And Edward is doing this honorably because, remember, the Law Society says only criminals can be on their roll. Edward says, I'm not a criminal, so let me do my humanitarian work, get the corruption away from good people. And they want this slavery poverty system. They want to remove the whistleblowers. So it's not a democracy, it's a dictatorship, it's a terrorist state. And so you can't say that you're running a justice system when it's not running properly, it's running in reverse. You've got criminals in top jobs in all public services who are immune to prosecution. They do not go to jail. If the more crimes they commit, the higher up they go on the ladder. And with Edward and myself, we provide free, whatever we can do, 24/7 telephone service. We help each other when we're in trouble, and we're like a family. And it's like, further down the road, if Lee's in trouble, I will come and help him. He knows that, etc. Lee.
Go ahead, Lee.
Yeah. All of the 200 corruption claimants who have been processed by the High Court in a very prejudicial manner, all of those people contacted Edward. Never has Edward gone out to recruit people. That's never happened. It's always been an introduction. Like Neelu, for instance, spoke to me about her cases, and I mentioned Edward Ellis to her, and then Neelu contacted directly Edward. So it's all been done. But Erdsley and the judges, they've fabricated false witness against Edward by stating that Edward has gone out to recruit people, and that is wholly and totally untrue. He has never ever recruited anybody. In fact, he's rejected people. A lot of people have come to Edward asking for help, and he's refused to offer them help because he's been too busy, or their case hasn't been of sufficient high quality or standard, or had enough evidence, to prove what they're saying is true and correct. So what we would do is we would go to Edward, relate all the facts, and give our bundles to Edward. He would read through it, and then from what we've given to Edward, he would then write something, usually 1 page, about our case, and then we would sign it, and then lodge it with our bundles into the court. And you've got judges like Judge Luber, who sees Edward's name on a document like this that I attached to my bundle, and it's got the people versus top judges, and judge said, oh, you're not allowed to use certain words because that's a breach of a restraint order on Edward Ellis. You're not allowed to use the word citizen because it breaches the restraint order. And you're not allowed to use the word top judges, even though they are the top judges within the High Court system. And there's a whole long list of these banned words. And that's all that Edward has ever done. That's the crime. That's the totality of the accusation. That's why he's gone to prison, because he's simply written these documents and lodged them into the court. And they put him in prison for 12 months for that. It's absolutely insane. I've never ever, no one would believe. They'd call me a liar. You couldn't believe or justify simply by writing. And he never charged any money for writing these documents. He's never gained anything, benefit from it. It's been total aggravation. It's been annoying for him, because a lot of the corruption claimants, they're all so broken down. They're all destroyed as human beings. They've been put under so much distress and psychological pressure that they can some of them can't even speak properly. You've got a victim like Can say, who's not even English, he can hardly speak English, and Ardsley and the judges accused Edward of recruiting him. And he was introduced to Edward by another person, and he was never, Edward never even, it's impossible. Can say came out and denied it completely. He was never recruited as part of a campaign. And there's a long list of about 6 or 7. I think even my name was put on that list, where I'm supposed to be recruited by Edward. And I first met Edward in about 2014, and he was walking up and down the pavement outside the High Court. And a person came up to me and said, "Well, talk to Edward. He's got some very good advice or ideas about how to present your case." So I went up to Edward and I spoke about my cases, and he said, "Oh, I'm not really interested in your case. Send me an email anyway. I'll have a brief look at it." And then he walked away from me. And he forgot to give me his email address. So I had to chase after him, to get his email address. He wasn't
Lee,
even.
I think it was 2016, because I met him in 2016.
Right.
So I tried to introduce you to him, but he was actually sent to look for the baby murder case in 2004.
Oh, sure.
So
I
he
think
found
that
in
is
2016. In
true.
12 years it took him to find me. But I think it's because the quality of the paperwork submitted by my family for the baby murder case was an international quality, because the two judges obviously from abroad. And I want to make this very important point, is that in England, the criminal justice system does not exist. And it's been hijacked by the civil justice system. So there are no solicitors who will privately prosecute an individual's case against the government. There are only false prosecutions by the state against individuals who happen to be whistleblowers. And this is the inversion of the justice system that is treasonous from top down. And that's the problem in England, is that it is not compliant with international law. The Crime International Cooperation Act 2003 was used by America to invade countries, to steal lands and assets of millionaires and honorable people, whistleblowers, who knew what America was doing to their finances abroad. And it's all connected with the banks, the fraudulent trading by the banks. So now all we're saying is we will use that same law against our governments who are now terrorizing their whistleblowers. The same law applies. And that will dissolve the government, it will dissolve the banks, and it will stop the terrorism under international law overnight. But we just need to learn the language of criminal language, of the crimes, treason, it's state terrorism, it is fraudulent trading, money laundering, human trafficking, slavery, and poverty system based on debts, which is illegal since the 17th of August 2015. Totally illegal since even 1963. It all has to be reversed. All compensation will be paid. It's unlimited amount of money to pay compensation. There's $1 quintillion for all of that settlement.
There would be more than 1 million victims who have been suffering quietly as a result of the judicial system here in England. They've delivered perverted verdicts. All their cases have been manipulated. There's been false witness statements inserted into their bundles. All sorts of crimes have been committed against millions of people who have been processed by the High Court, magistrates, Crown Court, even the Old Bailey. And look at the Julian Assange case. Look how shocking, disgraceful. That case proves that we're in a state of regnanum here in England, and that there isn't a proper law system operating. It's completely defunct, void, and that's well documented. All the crimes that the judges have done are well documented and proven in the Assange case. Lots of people have publicly come out and written articles and spoken clearly to explain the injustice of that case. And it reached such a high level. It went beyond the judicial system right up to government level. So it's no longer, it was so mangled, mashed up and destroyed, shredded to bits, that all that remained of it is three governments involved in negotiation as to the next stage.
But what they did in that case, Lee, was, if you remember, when we went outside the Old Bailey, they had said that they were sitting, the Westminster Magistrates Court was sitting at the Old Bailey.
They were.
So can you imagine a Westminster Magistrates Court hijacking the Old Bailey? Now, after the Magistrates Court, you go to the Crown Court. And after the Crown Court, you go to the Old Bailey.
Correct.
Julian Assange was kidnapped from an embassy. You cannot kidnap somebody who is taking asylum in an embassy unless you are a terrorist state. That is an act of terrorism.
Yeah.
You see, if you didn't stop Julian Assange being a subject of terrorism, the rest of us are easy peasy.
Yeah.
They're using us to prove that they can do this, and the international platform will tolerate it. And this is how they are exhibiting their power over the world, is they need to continue to demonstrate their power over the best of the best that are in England. And how they get away?
Boasting. They're boasting. It's a power, but ego crazed, insane ego boast that we can do anything we want. No law, no country can restrain what we want. We will do whatever we want to do. We can break any law, anywhere, any place,
Ramola's trying to speak, but we can't hear you, Romola. Did you try to speak? We can't hear you. No, we can't hear you.
Yeah, you've muted yourself, Romola. You've click on unmute, Romola.
No, it's not coming through. Oh,
Okay, we
maybe
will
try a
carry
microphone.
we'll
Try
carry
an
on.
external microphone.
But it's true what you're saying, Neelu, because
I
they
can't hear you. Can't hear you.
and
Oh,
Ah,
we
there you
went
are.
immediately to the Australian embassy here in London, and we
Hang on, Lee.
laid
Let
yeah
Romola come back.
yeah
Say no. No.
no. There's no sound, Romola. But we issued liens that bankrupted the Australian government because we proved fraud and we proved
No, but Lee,
conspiracy
Lee,
crime
wait,
cover up by the
Lee,
Australian government,
Lee. We
and
are
they broke
talking about
the
a
annual convention.
terrorist state that
Exactly.
is power boasting to the world in England
Exactly.
what it can do to its whistleblowers. We have got hundreds of whistleblowers that have been
Exactly.
attempts on their life. It is all attempted murder. If you take a whistleblower, call it a democracy, you are a terrorist, you know? So I think, Lee, I think this might be a good place to stop because Ramola's voice has gone and I don't want to continue with us where she's trying to say something. And
And
it's,
can you
and
hear me now? Can you hear me at all? Ah,
come
okay,
on now.
good. Wow.
Come
All
on.
right.
Wow, you've been
Okay,
absent
I
for
just
5 minutes.
Oh, no, no,
Yeah.
hang on,
let's
Lee,
stay
let
on a
her
little
catch
bit
up,
longer. We're
let
not
her
cutting
catch up.
off just yet. We're not cutting off just yet. I wanted to congratulate you both for laying out the situation so very clearly about the criminal justice system in particular having failed, and the fact that the government apparently is coming after people, but people have no recourse. And when the government does things that are wrong, there is no recourse in the court system because you have all
Exactly.
tried the court system, and Julian Assange's case certainly, and Edward Ellis's case appear to be along the same lines. They're both whistleblowers of crime and
Exactly.
corruption in the world. And they've both been thrown into prisons. And we find that these prison systems, both in the UK and the US, are owned by somebody else, not the government.
Exactly.
Initially we thought it was Serco. And now we find it's Sopra Steria, maybe it's the same company, but they seem to be an IT consulting company, and yet they're doing all sorts of things, right? So there are vast global multinational corporations that are making pots of money, but that are completely permitting crime and breakdowns in the judicial system to just go unnoticed because they are propping up a prison industry, really. And they don't care about the life and death or the suffering of the real people, which is what governments should do and, we all hope will do. So that brings me to one of the questions I wanted to ask you both. When the judicial system fails in the UK, what is the next recourse? Is it possible to appeal to the government directly? Can you speak to people in your cabinet, in parliament? How do you reach them?
We've done that already. We've gone to our MPs. Um, the highest court of appeal is the Supreme Court, and they normally reject every appeal. They reject just about everything because they can only decide on questions of law. That is their remit, and uh, they won't even consider new evidence. They won't even allow an appeal on any reasonable grounds or any. They seem to be in cloud cuckoo land, and they just make up their own rules. Again, they can make any decision anytime anywhere. The Supreme Court are a law unto themselves, and they don't, have they cut out their law degree off the back of a Kellogg's cornflakes packet? Is it just made of, cardboard without any substance
If
behind
I
it?
can just answer the question, Lee, that I think
Yeah,
that law that Ramola's just put up on the screen, the Crime
yeah,
International Cooperation Act 2003, is the way
yeah.
that we can dissolve the UK government, dissolve the banks, we can seize their assets. This mutual,
Yeah.
any country can come to our rescue. So, Lee, you've got a history in Australia. I have 5 members, myself, my family from India. I'm asking all the countries of the world to apply this law to save our whistleblowers who are in prisons and to protect us. We're entitled to protection and safety and security as whistleblowers in a democracy. Nobody can harm us. Nobody should be able to harm us. And
But they do attack us. They do, and they will raid
they can't be able
your
to harm
house.
us. They're not a democracy then. Don't call yourself a democracy if you're a terrorist state.
They will do an early morning raid with machine guns. They'll smash your door in, arrest you, and you'll end up in prison. And they will just create charges.
That's like Nazi Germany. That's outrageous that this kind of thing can happen.
Charges. That's what they'll do.
That's absolutely shocking. Absolutely shocking, and certainly it's time to appeal internationally, as you say, Neelu. And the other point I wanted to stress as well, as you both were speaking, is that what you are describing regarding the cases that we are looking at, the kinds of cases we're looking at, and the kind of people, what happens to people, when their lives are taken down, when their houses are removed from them, their mortgages are not honored, their children are taken away from them, their entire lives are destroyed. And then they are pushed into poverty, and they can't even get health care. And they can't get a listening ear in local government, who's supposed to take care of them. What happens to people like that? These are crimes against humanity. These are atrocities. So there may also be a way, Neelu and Lee, in international human rights law that these cases can be taken further, So we shouldn't give up. If your local governments are not taking care of you, and if they are harming you, if the mechanism, if the so-called law enforcement mechanism is not working for you but is harming you, there's also the military. There's an lay of military protection we are all entitled to within our separate countries. So can we appeal to the military? Can we put our cases forward to the military and say, look, this is what local government has done to us?
No, we did through with Edward's preparation of documents. I went to the High Court before a judge, MacLeod, for protection, and I think Neelu also went to the High Court to get a protetion order to help.
The military got invoked. The military got invoked, if you remember, to do with the financial system after the G8 2013 flopped, the announcements.
Yeah.
So there was a court case in South Africa against the South African Reserve Bank to stop the money laundering, and then Indonesia was involved with that, and then we had the UK Lloyds Banking Group prosecution, which the central bank, which dissolves the government of the UK immediately as of 2017. And then you've got the Solicitor General and Attorney General pretending that they have the power to put our whistleblowers in prison when they are meant to be advisors to the government. Well, the government has been ill-advised, and the government is shut down for fraudulent trading long before the Attorney General came for me and Edward. Because me and Edward were served on the same day, 8th of January 2019, for two different reasons. I was supposed to have noticed a notice on a door that I didn't walk through. Now, it was established that I did not walk through that door. I had two Lord Justices sitting 3 times to try to put me in prison for not reading a notice on a door that I didn't walk through. How ridiculous is that? This is the extent they
just in some kind of weird protocol. They just, and telling Edward he can't use certain words, etc. There's the other question, Neelu, and that has to do with the fact that Edward actually is representing the Equity Monarchy Trust, right? And so when you said he took 12 years to find you, was he working with someone else? Because that's the note I hope that we can close on to kind of remind our listeners and our viewers that Edward Ellis didn't start doing this work out of nowhere. He learned about, the breakdown of the criminal justice system, right? And as a barrister himself, was he a judge as well? He came forward, but he was also working with a group. And what group was that? Who commissioned him? Is he part of a royal commission? Is he part of, the monarchy trusts? And therefore, does the monarchy in some way, does the king come into play over here? And what about the prime minister, who is related to you as well, right, Neelu? So is there any way that you all can appeal to the prime minister, to Rishi Sunak, and to the king, King Charles, and to the Equity Monarchy Trusts that Edward is a part of? Surely there's been some good coming out of this monarchy in that sense. I mean, you can describe it for us. What exactly is the scenario there?
I think what Edward says is that they want me and Edward to be the victim, like the baby in the woods. They want us to put ourselves out there to see who comes out of the woods, to see who's left in the woods that they need to deal with. So it's like Edward knows that unless me and Edward are in trouble, then we're not going to find out who's doing what. And I think Edward puts himself out because he says that he's waiting for the cabinet to release him, and until the cabinet release him, the cabinet is unfit for purpose. I think that's the route he's taking.
I see.
And yeah, so it's always been like that. They keep coming and putting us in the courts because we're training the judges how to behave honorably. I just said to the judge, I'm a woman. A man cannot judge a woman when God's oath is to woman to serve and the man protects the family, or, as a public servant serves and protects, being the mother and the father. How can you sit in judgment of me? I am here to serve the children, and you are a man, and all you can do is protect me and the children. You can't punish me for that. That's treason. Right?
So in a sense, you both are being used as kind of lightning rods to, you're also frontline activists, you're frontline campaigners for freedom and justice and corruption, against corruption in the UK. And yet, because of that, it's almost a very hard line, right? Edward's holding out to bring attention to the cabinet being unfit for purpose, but now he's in jail. So how on earth is he going to be able to continue his work? What is the thinking over there, and who's doing this? Is Edward working for someone, or is he working for himself?
Well,
so, like, there's something I said to Edward, sorry, Lee, while it's fresh in my head, I said to Edward, how are you, Edward? Like, this was on the day he was kidnapped, on the 3rd of May. I said, how are you? I met him at the station. I went with him. How are you, Edward? And he said, well, I'm alive, aren't I? I think for him, that is the challenge he's winning, as long as he's getting his dialysis. And, that's, for me, that was like shocking, like,
Yeah.
And it's still a miracle that he's so strong. He is very strong willed.
So he's standing up. He's standing up as a barrister against people who do have power, but he's suffering abuse of power. He's become victimized by abuse of power, right?
And the other question, Romola, I must answer of yours is that before the solicitor's name, it used to be called equity law. And in Hindi, equity means equity, meaning that you bowl, when you're playing cricket, when you throw the ball, the first ball, and you hit the wickets, equity is the first ball knocks out, means that you know how to solve a case with one shot. Equity.
So equity is the shot,
The honourable, the criminal law, obviously it's all about ill intention, discovering it. Put everything on the timeline, and a split second shows you if somebody's lying about what they've done and, how they've come to do crime, and they can't. So it's very logical. It was called logic back in Lahore, that my family set up the justice system, and the 12th Sikh Guru, Maharaja the Hare, and then my great-great-granddad, Bhagwan Das, was the Central Assembly member for India and the foreign minister for India in Pakistan. And he was deceived by Annie Besant and led Vita into, he wrote 30 books on theosophy, and they set up the Theosophical Society, which was the basis of mental health frauds and mind control. So they used,
Really? So there's a
yeah,
connection between theosophy and mind control today. Oh, I have to investigate that further. That's definitely one of my major subjects, this whole mental health fraud thing that's going on that we totally need to take down. It's absolutely shocking. But
the
Neelu, it
tax.
sounds like you come from a royal family, and I also wanted to remind you, sorry to bring it up, but you are an aunt of Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister. So I'm not suggesting nepotism or something, but is there a way to appeal to this guy? Can you write a letter to him? Can he be made aware of the fact that Edward Ellis is standing up for corruption victims in the UK and he needs to do something about it?
Yeah, Neelu has. Neelu's written several letters to everybody over what
Really?
several
I
months.
would be happy to publish your letters, Neelu. Just send them my
Everybody.
way.
So
Yeah.
Edward is managing on behalf of the Royal Commission cases. That's his function. He gets a case. Somebody petitions Edward to take on the case
Hmm.
and help them. They're petitioning him, and he will examine it, and he will bring it up to the high level standard required
Hmm.
by by the Royal Commission, and then he will bundle it all up into a package. And I went to the post office with Edward, and it's all addressed to the Queen and Prince Charles at Buckingham Palace. So he would buy, um, several pounds worth of stamps, stick them, weigh them on the parcel, and we stuck them through, inside the post office. So that's what we used to do. And he always,
Wonderful.
I have written to King Charles as well, three or
Wonderful.
four times now,
Send me the
yes,
letters.
regarding,
you
it's all
have,
connected. The whole financial system is connected with the
you have.
corruption in the
Hmm.
judiciary, that the
Let's put
control,
finish your sentence, Neelu, please. I didn't mean to
yeah,
stop you.
control by the banks is what maintains the slavery system. And they
Hmm.
have unlimited amounts of money to go and hunt down the whistleblowers, whilst the criminals are being promoted up and up to the top of the public
Very
services.
wrong. Very wrong. We need to speak up for ourselves and for humanity. Have been doing this for many years, and we're going to continue doing it. Neelu and Lee, thank you so much for bringing forward all of this information. This has been absolutely fabulous. I'm going to be just publishing letters from now on. Send me the letters. I will publish them.
Okay.
There's
Any
a lot,
letters you've written, because it sounds like at this
lot,
point in time, that's who we need to look to. We need to look to the king, the queen, the prime minister,
there's
the
a lot.
cabinet, and parliament to step forward and
Yeah.
use their background, their education,
Yeah.
their training, and their true power, whatever power they have, to fully address this. Because it certainly sounds like Edward is running the correct court of law here. He's running the correct court of law, and you are running the correct court of law. The other system appears to be a failed system, and it should not be permitted to use the mechanism of law enforcement with armed guards and armed police taking people off and imprisoning and incarcerating them in prisons inside England, which are actually owned by people outside and France and so on, who clearly do not have the best interests of people in England at heart. So
That's,
you guys have done a mammoth job. Any last words you want to say to our listeners? Anything people can do or should do at this point to help Edward and to help
well,
everyone?
we could go on for literally days because there are several layers
We
of
can come
this
back
thing.
and do reports, smaller, briefer
We could
reports, more
go
focused.
on and on and on endlessly because we've got synchronicities that are predetermined, like
Mm.
the same Judge May has been attacking Neelu's family and Neelu, who attacked
Oh
Edward.
boy.
So she convicted Edward to prison, a suspended sentence. And then you've got DC Steve Martin, who arrested Neelu, he arrested me, he arrested hundreds of people, Andrula, Theodoro,
Lee,
hundreds.
we're just gonna just saying a few words. So
There's
I'll just
Edward in his trial, he said, I want a jury trial. I want 12 people on this case. It
Well,
is
he pleaded not guilty, so he's entitled to a jury trial. They could not have sent him to prison until
and
he's had his jury trial. So
exactly,
whichever way you look at it, it was a kidnapping. It was an outright
exactly,
power boast of a kidnapping of Edward Ellis. They've been trying to kill him for so many
and
years now. He's had
he
13. I had 13 teams of
exactly,
mental health teams break my front door looking for Edward with tasers in 2019, and Edward went
Yeah,
into hiding. He
I
went into
recall
hiding.
that.
They left my door with a
they
new
would have
lock
killed you.
next
They
door.
would have killed you actually with the tasers.
They
They
would
would
have
have given
killed
you a
and
heart attack.
my family.
They
Yes,
would
they
have,
would have killed. They've already killed my sister, my mother, and all that. So
yeah,
Lee, if they're going to end up. Well, it's to do with the theft of our trust
yeah,
funds from our birth trust funds from the central
yeah,
banks of the countries of
Mm-hmm.
our birth. So it's
Mm-hmm.
all connected to why they need to remove the whistleblowers, because they don't want any opposition. If they can remove the whistleblowers, then there is nobody to protect the people. The people will just be easy peasy, jab them
exactly.
and just get rid of them all, and then they will
Yeah,
have the crimes. They'll put
and
the
that's
crime.
not.
And Edward's got 3 outstanding unheard appeals against. Each time he gets sentenced to prison, he lodges an appeal to the higher court,
Yeah,
and
but
they've
Lee,
never ever been
life
heard.
it's his life
They-
that
they-
is being taken day by day, and by
yeah,
Sopra Steria. By Sopra Steria, that's the bottom line, is that we've come to the conclusion that
yeah,
nobody can do anything to stop
yeah,
his slow assassination in custody by Sopra Steria, pretending to be the Home Office of the Government of England, which has already been deemed a fraudulent trader because its central bank was jailed for 50 years and fined £80 million by the Financial Conduct Authority
yeah,
and Thames Valley Police Crime Commissioner Anthony Stansfeld, and the report, the Criminal Appeals Court heard the case on the 28th of February 2020. So the UK government is trading illegally, is fraudulent, must be shut down, assets seized, and the whistleblowers released from prisons. That's my last words. Thanks. It's lovely
we,
to
we,
be back on the what shall we say, the Durga channel.
we've
Wonderful last words, Neelu. Canto.
all of those corruption claimants, they've all got unheard appeals waiting for a date, the court to set a date to be heard. I mean, I've got several unheard appeals in Buckingham case and Sullivan case and Hackney case, and these appeals have never been heard. And Neelu paid £180 for an appeal against the arrest warrant and possession orders, and they've never been heard in the High Court, nor have they been heard in the Romford Court. So we're all sitting here not getting any justice,
That's
and the
absolutely shocking.
courts will never, they will
But
probably never ever
we're
get
not
a
expecting, Lee, we're not expecting justice, because we've come to the conclusion that we're of state terrorism now. Because the last words actually Edward said whilst he was being kidnapped in the courtroom,
Yeah.
Court 9, on the 3rd of May, was to the judges, to saying, I have not had my appeal. I had 8 weeks to appeal. You cannot do this, and this is terrorism. This will be international terrorism laws that will apply. And that's the law that we've gone through today. That applies to all cases of against local governments, central governments, public services, denial of honourable services to us, which is treason, and it ceases their trading and seizes their assets. And that's, everyone can say that now. That's
Yeah.
it.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. It's come to that point. International terrorism laws, international human rights laws, international ways of dealing with this, because the local courts and governments have failed so thoroughly. Very sad situation, but Neelu and Lee, both of your cases are so tremendous, and the case of your baby niece, Neelu, is particularly tragic that we opened this podcast with. So thank you for telling us that story again. I recall us having this conversation many years ago where you
Yeah.
presented her story and your sister's story. Many condolences in the loss of your family, particularly your sister. And you and she were hanging together. So I'm so sorry about all of that and all of the losses you have also suffered, Lee. Let's just, look to our audience to step forward and become whistleblowers themselves. Everybody's got to become a whistleblower in this time, rather than sitting back and not speaking. We've all got to be speaking at this point in time in order to bring corruption and crime forward and end injustice in our worlds today in all of the many different ways each of us can do. So I'm definitely going to be continuing this coverage as we proceed, and I hope to provide some print journalism as well as we proceed, so we can put the information out before the public eye and generally inform the world, because it appears the Guardian and the Independent and Telegraph and so on are simply not doing their jobs. I don't know why. I think they do get paychecks.
The banks,
So,
the banks are bribing them into silence. I think they buy out the stories. The banks will buy out the stories. And when my sister and I went to Indian media, we had a 3-hour documentary about the baby. They promised us it will go out to the world, but in the end, they only went out in India. And then we had some further interviews which they did not put out. So basically, the British Embassy in New Delhi was buying out our stories. That's what they do.
They're literally buying out the stories.
They literally bought out the stories. Yeah.
They would have made millions of dollars off that story for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a copy of
They got billion. It's just a number.
Do you have a copy of those recordings, Neelu?
They wouldn't give them to us. They just put them out and then we can't get them. So they've been bought out after that, after the show.
Yeah.
So
that's shocking that Indian media has gone under as well. I'm hoping it's a new day, that people have woken up, that there's a lot of Indian media out there that are beginning to wake up and recognize that, this is massive information. These are stories that need to be heard. Who else but, people like us who have the wherewithal to continue to speak out. I mean, are you and I a minority in this world? Are we the only women on the planet, or are we the only men on the planet who have a conscience and who are still thinking and feeling about these things and beginning to speak about it? I don't think so. There are tons of people, right? So people need to speak out. So on that note, thanks so much again, Neelu, for being here. Thanks, Lee, for being here. Thank you for bringing forward this information. And let's keep the focus on Edward. Yes, Lee?
Sorry, I have to go now. Just say goodbye, okay?
All right. Yeah, I'll close off.
When Neelu and Belinda and so on, people went down to visit Sabine McNeill at Bronzefield, the high security prison, the women's prison. Sabine got to know most of the prisoners there and was, helping people to recover and heal. And she actually said that in her estimation, in her humble assessment, that it could well be up to 80% of the women who were convicted there should not be in that prison, that in fact all of their sentences had no supporting evidence and there was no proper evidence to convict them. Up to 80% of the women there
That's shocking.
should not be there.
80% of the women
or
wrongfully
more.
imprisoned. Yeah.
Wrongfully imprisoned.
While the prison industry was making tons of money off their bodies.
They never did anything. They never did anything wrong. It was all, the whole case was fabricated, and it was all based on false witness statements, false accusations that the judge believed. The judge believed in lies, all deception, lies. People were telling complete wrong And that applies to Pentonville as well.
And
Edward
that
was
applies
saying
to Pentonville. And Edward is finding
as
that out as
well,
well. And he's
and
talking to many
Edward
prisoners. Hmm.
and I hope when you cut off the video, can we have just a private a
Oh,
private talk
absolutely. Oh, sure.
when you
Absolutely. As
finish?
soon as we close. So I just wanted to say, since you've just surfaced, that Sabine McNeill has discovered that Bronzefield Women's Prison in the UK is filled 80 to
That's right.
90% with women who have committed no crime and who should not have been put in prison, who've been wrongfully incarcerated, wrongfully prosecuted, etc. Perhaps she's another person that I need to speak to. She's out of prison now, right? Perhaps I
She's
can.
living in Berlin at the moment.
Ye- Oh, she is.
She served 4.5 years, but I can help you interview her. She did
Wonderful.
four wonderful interviews of an hour long or 55 minutes long with a wonderful lady in the south of Ireland,
Oh,
and
she
her
did.
name.
Okay, good.
She's a famous journalist. Um,
Gemma
um,
Doherty? No?
no, she's an English lady who lived here in London,
Okay.
and she rode a white beautiful horse, and her name escapes me for the moment, but I'll send you her links.
Okay.
But you
I'll
could
check out those videos.
I'd like to participate in an interview if you want me to
Certainly.
join in on. And I suggest you do do 2 or 3 short interviews with Sabine, and I can, join in on one if Sabine is happy to
Wonderful.
do
Yes,
that.
good idea. Let's close this now for our listeners and viewers. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful
Okay.
day. We'll certainly pick up on these subjects and we'll come back and do more interviews, news breaks, and report
Angela,
podcasts. Sorry?
Angela Disney
Angela
Powers is her
Disney. Disney
Powers.
Powers. Yes, I
Yeah,
believe I know her name. Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Lee, for participating. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you again another day. Thank you. Bye for
Okay.
now.